If you are building a house, you can spend, well, weeks, maybe even months, locked in these massive, incredibly intense debates with your roommates or your family about the interior design.
Oh, absolutely. Just completely consumed by the details.
Right. Like, you can argue until you are blue in the face about whether the kitchen tile should be ceramic or porcelain
Yeah.
or, what exact shade of gray to paint the living room walls. And the stakes feel incredibly high in the moment.
It feels like the most important thing in the world because, well, it is the only thing you're looking at. Your entire field of vision is just a paint swatch.
Yeah, exactly. It consumes all of your energy. And all the while, you are completely ignoring the fact that you built the entire house on a swamp.
Right, the foundation.
The foundation is literally actively sinking into the mud. You can paint the walls whatever color you want, but if the house is structurally collapsing, none of the interior design actually matters.
None of it. You're just decorating a sinking ship at that point.
And that feeling, that exhausting, sinking feeling, where you look around and realize nothing seems solid. I mean, it is everywhere right now. I hear it constantly from listeners, especially if you're a college student right now, or really anyone trying to navigate modern institutional life.
It's palpable. You walk across a modern university campus today, and you are just bombarded.
Bombarded with ethics departments, bioethics seminars, endless social media debates, diversity and compliance audits. There is this absolute mountain of moral discourse.
It's everywhere.
But beneath all of it, there is this gut-level sinking sensation that none of this morality actually holds any weight.
It is a very specific type of exhaustion. It is, the fatigue of participating in a system that is incredibly loud but structurally hollow.
Structurally hollow. That is a great way to put it.
Because we have professional ethicists consulting on corporate policy, we have governments establishing these massive ethics commissions, there are billions of people broadcasting their ethical intuitions on social media every single second. The volume is just deafening.
Yeah, it's a constant roar.
Yet, if you sit down and talk to thoughtful, educated people today, the dominant underlying intuition is that justice is totally negotiable, and truth is just, well, a social construct.
Which is a completely wild contradiction to live inside of, if you think about it. We are a culture obsessed with justice, but we fundamentally do not believe justice is a real, objective thing.
That cognitive dissonance is exactly what we are looking at today.
Right. And that brings us to the source material for this deep dive. It's a fascinating new white paper called The Ontological Crisis of Modern Morality. And it finally puts this exact feeling into words.
It really does. The document argues that we aren't just having a series of really tough, polarized disagreements. It claims that reality itself is collapsing under our feet.
We are arguing about the paint while the swamp swallows us.
Exactly. And the word ontological in that title is the key to the entire phenomenon.
So let's break that down for the listener, because ontology is a heavy philosophical term. What does it actually mean in this context?
Sure. Ontology is, well, it's the philosophical study of being. It is the study of reality itself, of what actually exists in the universe.
So we aren't talking about ethics, like right and wrong. We are talking about what is real.
Right. When the paper describes our current situation as an ontological crisis, it is pointing out that our moral arguments are no longer about differing interpretations of reality. They are about whether a shared reality even exists at all.
Wait, but history is an absolute slaughterhouse of people disagreeing over morality. I mean, we have fought thousands of wars over who is right and who is wrong. Why is today's environment any different?
That's the million-dollar question.
Why is the paper classifying our modern campus debates as a unique structural collapse rather than just the normal, messy human process of figuring things out?
Because historically, what you are describing is classical pluralism.
Classical pluralism.
Classical pluralism is when people disagree on how to apply shared objective principles. So two different cultures might go to war over a piece of land, both believing they are enacting justice.
Right. They vehemently disagree on what the moral truth is in that specific situation.
But, and this is the crucial distinction, they universally agree that moral truth actually exists in reality. They believe justice is a real thing, independent of human invention.
And they're both trying to lay claim to it.
Exactly. They believe they're trying to discover something real, even if one or both of them are horribly mistaken.
So it's like two people trying to solve an incredibly complex math problem. We might get completely different answers, and we might yell at each other about who carried the one correctly, but we both operate under the foundational belief that there is a single correct answer out there to be found.
Yes. The math exists outside of our opinions.
But the modern crisis is different.
The modern crisis is entirely different. Today, society largely disagrees on whether moral truth actually exists at all. We aren't arguing about the answer to the math problem anymore.
We are arguing that math itself is just a story we made up.
Right. We argue that math is just a construct to exert power over one another. The very existence of a shared objective reality is officially denied. And when the foundation of what morality is shifts from something we discover in the fabric of the universe to something we just invent in our minds, the cracks start showing up everywhere. We lose the shared reality.
So if morality is no longer considered an objective reality that we discover, what has it actually become?
Yeah.
If it isn't math, what are we actually doing when we argue online?
The white paper identifies this shift as the first massive structural failure of our time. It calls it displaced moralism or, moral subjectivism.
Displaced moralism, meaning it's been moved from its original spot.
Basically. Simply put, morality has been detached from being. It has been detached from what is actually real.
Okay, so how does the paper define it?
Displaced moralism is the modern assertion that right and wrong are not discovered realities, but internally generated preferences. They are products of cultural traditions or power interests or collective emotion.
So morality goes from being a fundamental fact of the universe, like gravity, to being a fashion trend, like wearing wide-leg jeans.
That is a perfect analogy.
It's just whatever the collective crowd decides is acceptable on any given Tuesday.
And if you look at classical philosophy, you see the exact opposite framework. Thinkers from Augustine to Thomas Aquinas taught that the good is entirely objective.
Objective, meaning it exists outside of us.
Right. Morality was understood as participating in the rationality that is embedded in creation itself. Truth was defined simply as conformity to reality.
So it wasn't a constructed narrative.
Not at all. To act morally was to align your actions with the actual physical and metaphysical order of the universe.
So in the classical view, if I say stealing is wrong, I am not just expressing my personal distaste for stealing. I am not saying, well, I don't prefer stealing.
No, you are stating a fact.
I am stating a fact about the structure of reality in the exact same way I would state water is wet or fire is hot.
Exactly. But in our modern framework, that grounding is completely gone. And the paper outlines 3 devastating consequences of treating morality like a constructed fashion trend rather than a universal law.
Let's get into those consequences, because I think this is where listeners will really see their own lives reflected.
First, morality becomes fundamentally political. It becomes purely negotiable. If truth isn't something we discover, but something we create, then the only way to establish a moral rule is through power and persuasion.
Oh, wow. So the fundamental question of human interaction shifts.
It shifts entirely. It goes from what is actually true to what can I convince you to accept, or worse, how can I force you to comply?
That turns every single interaction into a lobbying effort. It means there is no such thing as an earnest search for truth. There's only a struggle for dominance.
Which leads to the second consequence. Morality becomes emotionally volatile. It shifts with the wind of social sentiment.
Because it's unmoored.
Right. If morality is nothing more than a projection of feeling or collective preference, then the moment those feelings change, the supposed moral truth changes right along with it.
This completely explains the absolute whiplash of social media outrage cycles. You could wake up on a Monday, and a certain phrase or ideology is considered the ultimate moral good by the internet at large.
And then by Thursday,
using that exact same phrase will get you fired from your job and socially exiled because the collective emotional mood shifted. There is no anchor.
You are just trying to surf a chaotic wave of public sentiment, terrified of falling off.
It sounds exhausting. So what's the third consequence?
The third consequence, and arguably the most critical for a society's survival, is that morality loses its authority.
Loses its authority, meaning it can't tell us what to do.
Exactly. A socially constructed morality can mirror our current desires back to us, but it cannot bind us. And it certainly cannot correct us when we are wrong, because it has no ontological grounding, because it has no roots in actual reality. It becomes appearance without substance.
I see this play out constantly in what I call the classic dorm room debate. The whole, your truth versus my truth conversation.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere on campus.
Someone will make a claim and another student will respond, well, I hear you, but that is your truth and this is my truth. The paper is arguing that this specific framework makes genuine human conversation completely impossible.
Because if we are just colliding 2 internally generated perspectives with no shared standard of reality to judge them by, We aren't conversing, we are just negotiating.
Right. If my truth and your truth conflict, and there is no objective, the truth up above both of us to serve as an arbiter, how do we resolve the disagreement?
We don't, we just fight.
It makes me think of trying to sit down and play a game of chess, but both players feel completely entitled to independently redefine how the knight moves based on their current mood.
That's a great visual.
I move my knight in a traditional L shape, and you say, wait, my truth today is that knights move diagonally.
And if you say, no, the rules dictate the knight moves like this, I can just reply, well, those rules are a social construct designed to limit my knight's mobility.
And the game is over. Without a shared board and fixed rules that exist outside of our personal preferences, we aren't playing a game anymore. We are just two people fighting over pieces of carved wood.
And in a scenario where you have no shared reality and no fixed rules, whoever is louder, more aggressive, or holds more institutional power wins the fight?
The knight moves diagonally because the person with the most followers on social media says it does.
Or the person sitting on the disciplinary committee says it does. That is why modern moral debates on campus are so deeply exhausting. You are never actually appealing to reality. You are just bracing yourself against a raw assertion of power.
Okay, so if the rules of the game are stripped of reality and reduced to personal preference, what happens to the human being actually trying to play the game?
Yep.
Like, if there is no objective reality outside of me, what happens inside of me?
That is exactly where the paper goes next. The breakdown of external reality directly causes the breakdown of the internal self. As morality loses its ground, the unified self, the actual person who is responsible for taking action in the world, is systematically fragmented.
Fragmented.
Yes. The white paper calls this the second massive structural failure. It calls it the fragmented moral agent, or the disintegration of personhood.
Disintegration of personhood. I mean, that sounds incredibly clinical, but when you looked at the modern lexicon, the actual phrases we use in therapy, on social media, in casual conversation, it is terrifyingly accurate.
The language we use gives it all away.
Think about how often you hear people say things like, well, that wasn't really me, that was my trauma speaking. Or, I acted that way because my inner child was triggered. Or, that was a past version of me that I no longer identify with.
The paper explicitly analyzes that exact language. It points out that modern society has developed this concept of a distributed identity.
Distributed identity, like we are spread out.
Exactly. We treat ourselves less like a single, unified, responsible human being and more like a parliament of competing selves. You have the cultural self, the socially conditioned self, the trauma self, the authentic self, the professional self.
And they are all sitting in this internal parliament, constantly arguing and competing for dominance.
Right. And the fundamental problem with a parliament or a massive committee is that you can always blame another department for a failure.
Oh, wow. If a corporation makes a terrible decision, the marketing department blames the legal department, and legal blames accounting.
Precisely. If your identity works the same way, if no single unified entity is in charge, then no single entity bears ultimate responsibility for anything you do.
So it's the ultimate escape hatch.
The paper contrasts this fragmented parliament with the classical understanding of a unified subject. In the classical view, there was no division of liability.
You were just you.
Yes. The exact same I that acts wrongly, that lies or steals or hurts someone, is the exact same I that must repent, transform, and grow.
So moral growth wasn't about isolating the part of you that misbehaved and rebranding it.
Not at all. It was understood as the patient, lifelong work of integrating all your capacities. You took your intellect, your emotions, your desires, and your history, and you worked to unify them under the guidance of reason, directed toward a genuine good.
Because you are one whole person. But if you shatter the person into a dozen different identities or versions, the fallout for society is massive. The paper says that in this modern state, accountability completely dissolves into mere biography.
Responsibility dissolves into biography. That is a direct concept from the text. When someone commits a wrong today, the immediate cultural instinct is not to ask them to answer for their actions, but to extensively explore the biographical and environmental circumstances that produce the behavior.
We replace moral accountability with psychological contextualization. Oh, wait, let me push back on this a little bit.
Yeah.
Isn't recognizing how our environment or our past trauma affects us a good thing? I mean, we are taught from day one on a modern campus that this is the very definition of empathy. Is this paper actually telling us to throw modern psychology out the window?
Not at all. And it's important to clarify that. The classical view does not deny the deep, often devastating influence of trauma, circumstance, or biology. It is not anti-psychology.
Okay, good. So what is the difference then?
What it insists upon is a vital distinction. These factors contextualize your responsibility, but they do not dissolve it.
Contextualize versus dissolve. Let's dig into that. If trauma dissolves my responsibility, then I can honestly say, I didn't do that, my trauma did. I become a passenger in my own life.
Right. You are just a meat suit being piloted by your past experiences.
But if trauma only contextualizes my responsibility, what does that mean in practice?
It means you say, I did this. I am the one who acted. My trauma made it incredibly difficult for me to choose the right path, and it explains why I felt compelled to act this way. But I am still the unified person who made the choice.
Wow.
The paper argues that retaining this unified accountability is actually a deeply empowering realization, whereas the modern alternative is ultimately degrading.
It's empowering because it means I actually have agency. If my trauma is driving the car, I can't steer. But if I am driving the car, even if the steering wheel is broken and the road is icy, I'm still the driver. I can learn to navigate the ice.
Yes. It means genuine growth is still possible. You don't just have to constantly revise your identity or reframe your narrative for your therapist. You can actually change your character.
Modern psychology, as the text points out, often substitutes identity revision for character formation.
Yeah.
We just keep changing the labels on the jars without ever changing what is inside them.
And this fragmentation also radically alters how we experience universal human emotions, particularly shame and honor.
Oh, this is fascinating. How does the paper talk about shame?
Well, classically, shame was a vital, even healthy mechanism. It was the sorrow of falling short of your own potential. It was the painful recognition by a unified subject that it had failed to reach the objective good.
So it was an indicator light on the dashboard.
Exactly. Today, because there is no objective good and no unified subject, shame is viewed entirely as a toxic psychological pathogen that must be therapized away or medicated out of existence.
Right, because if there is no objective standard, then feeling bad about failing to meet a standard is just a glitch in your brain chemistry. There's nothing real to fall short of.
And the flip side is true for honor. Honor, classically understood, is the feeling of being completely at one with yourself. It is integrity.
Literally being integrated.
Exactly, integrated into one whole. It is impossible to experience the deep, quiet peace of honor if you are fragmented into a dozen different competing selves. You cannot be at one with yourself if there is no unified self to begin with.
So we arrive at this terrifying intersection. We have no objective moral ground. Morality is just a swamp of shifting preferences and power dynamics. And our concept of personal responsibility is shattered. We are a chaotic parliament of competing identities, absolved of responsibility by our own biographies.
It is a recipe for disaster.
If you are running a university, a corporation, or a government, and those two things are true at your population, how do you prevent total catastrophic chaos?
You have to invent an artificial glue to hold it all together. You have to create something to force people to behave when they have no internal compass and no external reality to rely on.
Which brings us to the third structural failure diagnosed by the paper: procedural ethics and systemic substitution.
We outsource our moral judgment to machines, algorithms, and bureaucratic systems.
This is the failure that I think is going to hit our listeners the hardest, because it is the water we swim in every single day. We are talking about the complete shift from substantive moral judgment to blind procedural compliance.
Right. The fundamental question of human organization has changed completely.
What used to be the question?
In a classical society, when faced with a decision, the leaders would ask, what is genuinely good? What is actually true about human dignity in this specific situation?
And what do we ask today?
Today, we ask a fundamentally different, purely administrative question. We ask, did we follow the rules and execute the process correctly?
It is all about the process. We don't care about the destination. We only care that the train ran on time. The paper gives some incredibly concrete campus examples. Take consent frameworks, for instance.
That's a huge one.
Now, obviously, consent is a vital baseline for human interaction. No one is arguing against consent. But the paper points out that modern consent frameworks often reduce the entirety of ethics to a mere contractual agreement, without ever pausing to ask if the act itself serves any authentic human good.
It treats human intimacy like clicking agree on the Apple terms and conditions. It is just a checkbox.
A completely procedural checkbox.
And the same logic applies to harm reduction models, diversity compliance structures, and algorithmic decision protocols. These systems are marketed as ways to create absolute fairness and eliminate bias.
But what do they actually do?
What they actually do is displace moral thought entirely. They move ethics out of the realm of human reality and into the purely administrative realm. Ethics is no longer about participating in the order of being or discerning the good. It is strictly about managing human behavior through external, rigid systems.
This leads directly to what the paper calls the horror of perfect procedure.
Right.
I want to camp out here a second because this is a terrifying modern condition.
It really is.
It is the realization that an action can be procedurally flawless, entirely legal, thoroughly documented, and completely substantively evil.
Yes. The paper provides a very stark example to illustrate this. Imagine an organizational termination, like a student being expelled from a university program or an employee being fired from a corporation. The firing process might follow every single legal requirement to the letter. Every HR policy was adhered to, every warning was formally documented, every committee vote was logged correctly. The procedure was absolutely flawless.
By the book.
Completely by the book. Yet, it constitutes a profound, devastating injustice because the person was fired specifically for telling an unpopular truth or for demonstrating genuine moral integrity that threatened the institution.
The system worked perfectly to create a tragedy. The gears turned exactly as they were designed to, and they crushed an innocent person.
Exactly.
I always think of this like writing a computer program. If you are a coder, you know you can write a piece of code that is technically immaculate, it has zero syntax errors, it compiles perfectly, it satisfies all its parameters.
The code is flawless.
Right, the computer executes the script exactly as written. But if that code was designed to deploy a virus that wipes out a hospital's database, or an algorithm that bankrupts a teacher's pension fund, the output is a disaster. The program was correct procedurally, but the result was objectively evil.
Procedural ethics attempts to create justice without human encounter. It administers morality through blind systems rather than discerning morality through unified persons engaging in genuine relationships.
And the terrifying part is that there is absolutely no room for moral courage in a perfectly procedural system.
None. Because if the system is God, then your individual conscience is completely irrelevant. It's actually a threat. The only virtue a system recognizes is compliance.
So true.
Classical justice was the exact opposite of a blind system. Classical justice required discernment, practical wisdom, and most importantly, deep engagement with the concrete reality of the other person.
You can't systematize it.
You cannot fully systematize justice into an algorithm or an HR handbook because true justice requires a human soul to recognize another human soul, assess the unique context, and make a living judgment.
Let's pull all of this together. We have these three structural failures. First, the loss of an objective moral ground, the swamp. Second, the shattering of the unified identity, the parliament of selves. Third, the blind adherence to procedural compliance, the horror of perfect procedure.
The unholy trinity of modern morality.
Right, and the white paper makes a massive unifying claim here. It says these three failures aren't just random, unfortunate coincidences of modern life. They are symptoms of a singular ancient disease.
Yes. The paper moves from pointing out the symptoms to delivering a formal philosophical diagnosis. It introduces a classical theological concept called privation theory to explain exactly what has happened to our civilization.
Privation. Let's really dig into this because this concept is the linchpin that makes the entire paper make sense. What is privation theory?
Well, privation is a concept that was heavily developed by St. Augustine in the 4th and 5th centuries. Augustine was wrestling with the problem of evil, and he concluded that evil is not a positive force.
Not a positive force, meaning it's not a thing.
Right. It is not a competing thing in the universe. It isn't a dark cloud or a villainous entity or a substance that exists on its own. Evil is strictly an absence.
An absence.
Yes. It is a deficiency. It is a falling away from being into non-being. Just as darkness is not a substance, it is simply the absence of light. Evil is the absence of goodness. It is a hole in reality.
So if I have a cavity in my tooth, the cavity isn't a thing that the dentist needs to extract. The cavity isn't a substance that got added to my mouth. It is the absence of the healthy enamel that was supposed to be there.
That's a perfect way to grasp it.
A pain I feel isn't from the presence of a new thing. It's from the lack of a necessary thing.
Exactly. And applied to our modern moral collapse, the paper argues that we are suffering from three weakening privations.
Let's walk through them.
First, the privation of moral ground. We lost our objective reality. The foundation is missing. Second, the privation of moral unity. We lost the integrated whole person. And third, the privation of moral encounter. We lost living human judgment and replaced it with cold systems.
So when you stack those three privations, those three massive gaping holes in reality on top of each other, what kind of society do you get?
The paper's description of our current civilization gave me absolute chills.
Me too.
It says we are highly sophisticated, we are incredibly articulate, we are deeply emotionally expressive, and yet we are internally, fundamentally hollow.
Hollow. Because of the privation.
Yes. We desperately shout words like justice and truth and human rights while operating within intellectual frameworks that make those concepts literally impossible to define or defend.
We are furiously pouring water into a bucket that has no bottom, and we are looking around confused and angry, wondering why everyone is still dying of thirst.
Exactly.
This completely reframes the mental health crisis on campuses for me. When students tell me they feel completely exhausted and drained by campus discourse, or when they feel like they need a week to recover from reading the news or participating in a social media debate,
Right.
they aren't feeling the physical fatigue of lifting a heavy argument. They're actually feeling the existential exhaustion of staring into a void. They are swinging their intellectual arms as hard as they can, but they're hitting empty air.
That is exactly what the paper is arguing. When you engage in a moral debate today, you aren't pushing against reality. There is no friction, no grounding, no solid truth to lean against. You are trying to build a house in a swamp.
And it drains you.
The exhaustion comes directly from the privation. It takes an immense amount of cognitive and emotional energy to pretend that a socially constructed illusion is a solid foundation.
If the problem is a privation, if the root cause of our exhaustion is a lack of reality, a hole in our existence, then the only possible cure is to flood the system with reality. You have to fill the hole.
You have to restore being.
And this is where the paper pivots from being a diagnosis of a disease to being a blueprint for reconstruction. It doesn't just leave us drowning in the swamp.
No, it offers a robust, reconstructive framework for human flourishing. The paper calls this the Light, Love, Life framework. It is explicitly tailored to help individuals rebuild their own moral architecture from the ground up, even if the institutions around them are still collapsing.
Light, love, and life. Let's break these down one by one because these words carry a lot of cultural baggage.
Yeah.
What exactly does the paper mean by light?
Well, in this framework, light represents truth. But it defines truth very specifically as illumination, the ability to see reality exactly as it actually is.
So it's not about being stubbornly right.
Yeah, the paper is incredibly careful to distinguish this from rigid ideological certainty. Light is not about possessing a perfectly inflexible dogma that you bludgeon other people with. It is about a living, breathing clarity that only comes from making genuine, humble contact with objective reality.
I think of light as having an accurate map. If you are lost in a dense, dangerous forest, ideological certainty is holding a map of a completely different forest, or maybe a map you drew yourself with crayons, and rigidly insisting that you know exactly where you are, even as you walk off a cliff.
That happens all the time.
But light true illumination is suddenly being handed an accurate topographical map of the actual terrain you are standing on. It doesn't make the hike any less steep, but it lets you see the trees, the rivers, and the cliffs for what they really are. You can finally navigate.
You absolutely need the accurate map to navigate reality. But as we all know, staring at a map will not move you an inch. You need a propulsive force, which is why the second element of the framework is love.
Now, love is a word that has been completely sterilized by modern culture. We use it to describe everything from our feelings about a romantic partner to our feelings about a specific brand of iced coffee. How is the paper redefining love away from our modern, sentiment-based understanding?
It brings it all the way back to the classical understanding. In this framework, love is not a fleeting emotion or a warm sentiment. Love is the deep, structural integration of a person's will toward the authentic good.
Integration of the will.
Yes. It is the gravitational force that heals the fragmented self.
Wait, walk me through the mechanics of that. How does love actually heal the parliament of selves we talked about earlier?
Well, think about it. If you are a fractured committee, the trauma self, the cultural self, the professional self, all fighting for the steering wheel, what could possibly unify them?
Nothing internal, I guess.
Right. The only thing that can unify a fractured person is a singular, overwhelmingly powerful desire for what is genuinely, objectively good. When your will is integrated and aimed at a worthy, transcendent destination, all those fragmented parts align behind that single purpose. Love is the gravity that pulls the shattered pieces of the human person back into a unified whole.
So, if light is the accurate map of reality, Love is the internal engine. It's the drive, the unified horsepower that actually propels you forward toward a worthy destination.
And that movement, that actual propulsion through reality is the third element, life.
Life.
Yeah.
Meaning what? Not just a biological heartbeat, right?
Correct. The text defines authentic life not as mere biological existence, and certainly not as preference satisfaction, which is how our modern consumer culture defines a good life.
Preference satisfaction, like just acquiring enough money and status to get whatever you want whenever you want it.
Exactly. That's not life. Authentic life is the full actualization of personhood through sustained participation in a transcendent order. It is the dynamic reality of living out the truth, driven by love.
Wait, transcendent order, that's a heavy academic phrase. Let's ground that for a 20-year-old listening right now.
Yeah.
Does participating in a transcendent order mean you have to suddenly adopt a specific religious theology? Or does it just mean believing in a moral law that is bigger than your university's student handbook?
It means recognizing and participating in an objective reality that outlasts your feelings, outlasts your social media feed, and outlasts your university's administrative policies.
A reality beyond the present moment.
Yes. It is a reality that transcends the current cultural moment. It means waking up and saying, there is a truth that is bigger than me, and my life's purpose is to align with it.
So, light is the map. Love is the engine. Life is the actual dynamic journey of moving through the real world with purpose.
Oh.
You aren't just sitting in your room looking at the map, and you aren't just revving the engine in the driveway. You are actually participating in the journey.
Yes.
When you put those three together, when you have the map of reality, the unified engine of love, and the dynamic journey of life, you escape the swamp.
Yeah.
You are no longer dealing with privation.
Right, yeah.
You are flooded with reality.
It is a beautiful philosophical framework, but the paper doesn't stop at philosophy. It outlines very specifically how the listener can take this framework and apply it practically to the chaotic reality of modern life to help lead what it calls a civilizational recovery.
This is where the rubber meets the road. If I am a college student walking to class tomorrow morning, facing Title IX compliance forms, intense social media outrage over a global conflict, and a classroom environment that denies objective truth, how do I actually do this?
The white paper gives us 3 restored pillars, which we can think of as 3 daily habits or practices for moral realism. Habit number 1, grounding morality in being.
So if I'm trying to fix this, I assume step 1 is changing how I argue, like treating truth like something I'm hunting for rather than a weapon I'm inventing to win a debate.
Exactly that. In practice, this means treating moral claims as discoverable realities, not as negotiable opinions. When you enter a conversation about justice in your dorm room, you have to consciously shift your own mindset from, how do I win this argument and assert dominance, to what is actually true here.
That's a huge shift.
You have to anchor yourself in the belief that there is a right answer, even if it is incredibly hard to find, and even if neither of you currently possesses it.
It's a habit of profound intellectual humility mixed with unshakable objective conviction. You are looking at the other person and saying, I might be wrong and you might be wrong, but the truth exists outside of both of us, and our shared job is to align with it, not to invent it.
That is habit number 1. Pillar 2 is insisting on unified personhood. This means actively embracing genuine accountability and transformation over narrative shifting and identity revision.
This means catching yourself when you start to use that distributed identity language we talked about earlier.
Yes. When you make a mistake, when you hurt a friend or fail an assignment, the habit is to say, I did that. I am responsible. You do not say, that was my trauma reacting, or that was a product of my environment.
You stop outsourcing the blame to your biography.
Right. You absolutely acknowledge the heavy baggage you carry, but you take ownership of your actions as a single unified person. Because only by taking ownership can you actually repent, grow, and transform your character. You refuse to be a passive victim of your own biography.
That is a heavy burden, but it's also the most freeing thing in the world. It means I am actually in the driver's seat of my own life. Okay, what is the third pillar? What does the action plan look like?
Pillar 3 is returning to substantive ethics through moral courage. This is where it gets highly practical and potentially dangerous for campus life. This means actively rejecting blind procedural compliance.
Rejecting the blind compliance.
Yes. The paper explicitly states that procedures exist to serve the good never exists to serve the system.
What does moral courage actually look like on a Tuesday afternoon when the administration sends you an email?
Moral courage is the willingness to resist unjust systems and retain your capacity for personal, human moral judgment, even when that judgment explicitly contradicts institutional policy or the false peace of cultural relativism.
So what's an example of that?
Well, for example, if you are asked to participate in a process, maybe it is a student disciplinary hearing, or a club's censure of a controversial member, or signing a mandatory ideological statement to retain your scholarship. And you know that the procedure is technically correct, according to the rulebook, but the outcome is fundamentally, substantively unjust. Moral courage means you stand up and say no.
You refuse to outsource your conscience to the algorithm or the committee. You retain your human judgment.
Exactly.
But wait, let's be totally realistic about the consequences here. This sounds incredibly daunting. To be the one unified person practicing moral realism, insisting on objective truth, and resisting the bureaucratic system when your entire institution runs on procedural compliance and fragmented identity, doesn't that guarantee you will be totally isolated?
It's a huge risk.
Aren't you just asking a 20-year-old listener to voluntarily become a social and academic pariah?
The text absolutely acknowledges the gravity of this conclusion. It does not promise that this will be easy or that you will be rewarded by the system. In fact, it warns that the work is incredibly difficult, the institutional resistance will be fierce, and speaking the truth is often very costly.
So why do it?
It makes two vital points in response to that fear. First, individuals who commit to this become vital instruments of hope. When you act with moral courage, you become a beacon for everyone else in the room who is secretly exhausted by the swamp.
You give other people permission to acknowledge reality. The moment one person says, "The emperor has no clothes and this procedure is unjust," the spell is broken for everyone else who is too afraid to speak.
And second, the paper highlights the essential role of communities. It calls for families, small schools, friend groups, and local associations to become lighthouses in a dark age.
So you don't have to be a lone wolf.
You do not have to do this entirely alone, and you shouldn't try to. You must find or build small communities where moral realism is practiced, where virtue is actively formed, and where truth is sought together.
Community is the key.
The paper concludes that societies, or even just small subcultures, that recover these pillars are the only ones capable of long-term human flourishing. The alternative, staying in the swamp of relativism and procedural compliance, leads progressively and inevitably to spiritual emptiness and civilizational fragility.
So the path is hard, and it might cost you social standing in the short term, but the alternative is spiritual death. You either climb the mountain or you drown in the swamp.
There is no third option.
Let's bring all of this together for the listener. If you are tuning in right now and you have been feeling that bone-deep exhaustion, that burnout from the endless debates, the hollow outrage, and the confusing systems you are forced to navigate, remember that you are living through an ontological crisis.
You aren't crazy.
You aren't. You aren't just losing a series of tough debates. The foundation has shifted beneath you. The culture has detached morality from reality, shattered the unified self into a million pieces, and replaced genuine human judgment with cold, bureaucratic procedures.
But you do not have to accept those privations. You do not have to live in the void. You can choose to be a unified self, capable of real transformation, rather than a fragmented victim of circumstance.
You can navigate by the light of truth. You can power your life with the love of the good, and you can step into the authentic life of participating in something real.
It's all about participation in reality.
So we want to leave you with a specific, highly practical challenge based on everything we uncovered in this text today. Tomorrow or later today, when you are inevitably asked to click agree on a compliance form, or when you feel the overwhelming social pressure to adopt the consensus of a social media outrage cycle, just pause. Take one breath and ask yourself two questions.
It's a crucial moment.
Are you just participating in an empty procedure to protect yourself, or are you actually encountering reality? And are you hiding behind a fragmented identity, blaming your circumstances, or are you stepping forward as a unified person capable of holding the heavy, brilliant weight of the truth?
That is the ultimate question we all have to face.
Because if you want to build a life that actually lasts, you have to stop arguing about the paint colors. And you have to make sure you aren't building your house on a swamp.